Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is community-led solar in Boston, lessons learned from a pilot project. We have a lot of amazing guest speakers with us today, but before we go to them, I'd like to go over a few webinar logistics. We're using a newly updated version of GoToWebinar. We're getting used to this new platform, and we encourage you to provide feedback in our post-webinar survey or via email. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Your webcam and microphone are disabled. You can submit questions and comments via the questions panel with that little icon there. Speaker bios are available in the materials section, and automated captions are available if you click the CC button. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. We'll email you a webinar recording within 48 hours, and it will be posted on CESA's website. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our moderator for today, Matt Olaf.
Great, thanks so much, Zareen, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. As Zareen said, my name is Matt Olaf, and I am a project manager at the Clean Energy States Alliance, or CESA. CESA is a national nonprofit made up of public agencies and organizations working together to advance clean energy. Next slide, please. So CESA works with state leaders, federal agencies, industry representatives, and other stakeholders to develop clean energy programs and inclusive renewable energy markets. CESA members, mostly state agencies, include many of the most innovative, successful, and influential public funders of clean energy initiatives in the country. And you can see our members' logos on your screen right now. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is being hosted by CESA on behalf of our Solar with Justice project. While the case study being discussed on this webinar was not developed as part of the Solar with Justice project, there is significant overlap between the Solar with Justice project and the focus of the webinar today. The Solar with Justice project is looking into ways in which states and community-based organizations can collaborate more effectively to advance solar in low-income and disadvantaged communities. The project has developed several reports, case studies, and other materials to highlight equitable solar development. You can find these resources on the webpage at the bottom of this slide. The Solar with Justice project is primarily funded by the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Energy Technologies Office, and the Nathan Cummings Foundation also has provided financial support for the project. Next slide, please. So the webinar today will focus on Energy Allies and the Boston Community Solar Cooperative's model for community-led solar. They recently released a case study on this model that they developed titled Community-Led Solar in Boston, Lessons Learned. CESA is thrilled to host this webinar and elevate this project as a model for other communities across the country. You can see the panelists that we have today presenting. Two of the panelists are representing Energy Allies, Diana Eddowes and Yesenia Rivera from Energy Allies, and then four panelists representing the Boston Community Solar Cooperative, Greg King, Kate Royce, Beth Griffith, and Sam Kodua. So they will be presenting various aspects of the project that they developed and takeaways from their case study. So before I hand it over to the panelists, I'd like to mention that there will be time for Q&A after the presentations. If anyone has any questions while the panelists are speaking, please put your question in the question box and we'll field them after the presentation. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Diana and Yesenia.
Thanks, Matt. As Matt mentioned, my name is Yesenia Rivera, and I am the Executive Director of Energy Allies. And we want to start by thanking CESA for hosting us. Today, we're sharing our lessons learned from a community-led solar pilot project, and we're sharing these in the hopes that others can learn from this process and build off our success for future projects. Next. At Energy Allies, our mission is to revolutionize the energy system by ensuring that the communities most impacted by climate change lead the local clean energy solutions. We believe that climate impacted communities have the power and the knowledge that's necessary to lead our clean energy transformation and lead to a just transition. Next. In 2021, we set out to design a participatory community-led process that flipped this traditional model of community solar by putting the communities first and focusing on communities that have been traditionally left out of sustainable development opportunity. The reason we did this is because community solar has the potential to be more equitable and inclusive than rooftop solar. As of November of 2023, less than 4% of community solar projects in Massachusetts serve lower income residents. And those projects are often imposed on communities after they've been built and always put profit first. Next. So why community-led solar? What is community-led solar? And we see it as a form that prioritizes community. Again, it is still community solar, but it prioritizes community before profit. And unlike traditional community solar projects, which are built by outside developers and financiers, that again, the number of times I've heard developers say that they have projects, they want to bring in all these projects to communities, but they keep getting pushback from the communities. And I ask, well, have you talked to the communities? That is always a no. Because they don't talk to the communities first. And our model decisions are made through a paid community advisory board, and they're involved from day zero. We didn't want to dictate what did they decide, but we did lay out the options for them and walk them through the process of developing their own community solar if they so choose to. Next. So why Boston? Initially we set out to create a community solar project that would provide between 300 and 500 kilowatts. Given our team's location at the time, we decided that the first project would serve some of Boston's highest energy burning communities. And these include Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. Energy burden across the entire state sits at about 3%. In some of these communities, however, it can reach well above 7%. These communities have a history of redlining practices that have led to poor housing stock as well as disinvestments. And I'll hand it over to Diana next.
Thanks, Yesenia. Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Eddowes. I'm a program director at Energy Allies, use she, her pronouns. And I've been a part of this work from the beginning. So next slide, please. In 2021, we started doing community outreach and assessing what the community knew about solar, what they understood, what they wanted, what they needed. And we did this by talking to many organizations that were already established in the areas Yesenia just mentioned, as well as going out into the communities at farmers markets and other events where we could chat to people about energy burden and community solar and try and get interest in this project. We spoke to over 30 organizations and had a survey out to kind of gather some of this data, which was critical in kind of shaping the project from the start. And that's something we is really important for this model, is kind of getting the community input from the start. As you see in the picture there, we were actually called Solstice Initiative before, and now we're Energy Allies. So we did this work over many years. But after about 6 months of this kind of initial community needs assessment and outreach phase, we were able to bring together a group of people to form a community advisory board. Next slide, please. And originally we had about 12 community advisory board or CAB members that came from a variety of backgrounds. They had different levels of knowledge of solar, of energy. Some represented organizations you see here. Some were just individual members of the community that were curious and wanted to learn. About 78% identified as people of color, and 82% were from low to moderate income households. And we also had representation from youth apprentices that were part of Bikes Not Bombs, one of our partners. So we really had a great age and background diversity. And so we brought these people together starting in October 2021. Next slide, please. And we started out with a few different topics to kind of ground everyone in the same information and knowledge they needed to drive a community solar project. And so these were about bi-weekly meetings, about 2 hours long in the beginning. The initial meeting, we really focused on community building, learning about each other, coming up with community agreements and group norms. And then from there, kind of built off different topics that were pretty critical for their for building knowledge and building that confidence to make decisions on the project. And so next slide, please. So one of the things we always wanted to make sure we were doing was having the cab drive everything. So staff at Energy Allies would draft something like objectives, and then we would review that with the cab members and get their feedback, because we wanted this process to be completely driven by them. So our objectives that we came up together were to gather a diverse group of stakeholders, to empower those community members to make decisions and be clean energy ambassadors, and then ultimately to create a community benefits plan, which sort of captured all of the discussions and priorities that this group of people had for the project. Next slide, please. And just to give you a sense of how we did this, so we actually started, it was still peak Omicron season with COVID, and so we did this all via Zoom initially, and that was also something we checked with the CAB beforehand to see what their preference was. But we got creative and used things like Jamboard to still have an interactive component to all the sessions. So one of the things we did really early on was this to from exercise where people put on a sticky for what the energy system looks like now and how they want to see it in the future, which is the green stickies. Next slide, please. We also had people kind of draw and envision what this solar project could be for their community, sort of starting at that really big high level picture. And these are some of the kind of comments that came out of that visioning session. So in addition to kind of the more specific topics, we tried to bring in these kinds of activities to break up the lecturing and sort of that traditional model of education and make it really community focused, and then also like making sure it was a two-way piece where the community was giving us information as we were giving them information. Next slide, please. So we also did use the Jamboard for more specific community solar topics like solar workforce development and construction priorities. So this is just another example of how we use that tool to gather information that was ultimately put in the community benefits plan. Next slide, please. And in the background of all of these community advisory board sessions, Solstice/Energy Allies staff was doing a lot of work on site analysis. So we were looking to identify very large roofs because we wanted to site the project in the communities so that the benefits would stay within those communities as much as possible. So we were looking at roofs greater than 10,000 square feet. We used GIS to identify those and then overlaid different GIS layers to narrow those down to areas with high energy burden, in environmental justice populations, race, income, different demographics like that. And then we pulled those addresses out, found who owned them, which was difficult, and then tried to do outreach to those owners. So we pulled about 1,000 sites out of GIS. We contacted about 200 property owners. And then those that replied, we had about a dozen meetings with different property owners who were interested. And when they were interested, we would then work with our partners, Revision Energy, who helped with technical assistance for this project, to do the deeper dive in helioscope analysis. Next slide, please. So after we did kind of the initial education phase of the CAB process, we started to want to change it up a little bit. And so we started doing circular agendas where CAB members were able to tell us what they wanted to cover in that meeting, and rotate that around. We also established a way to make decisions in the CAB. So we used ranked choice voting to do that. So people had multiple options and then could rank what they wanted, and then overall whoever came out on top would be the decider. In addition to that, we started forming working groups to get some of the more specific work done, and people could choose which topic they were most interested in working on. One topic that came up and we had many sessions on was project ownership, and we kind of shared out 3 different models: third-party ownership, traditional or flip model, or community ownership. So we had a lot of discussions on that, and community ownership did come out on top, and you'll see how that evolved over time in the next presentation. So next slide, please. So as we piloted this and we were figuring out as we went, we started to realize we should create kind of a process so that others could replicate this. So we came up with this kind of phased approach, which are just the phases that I've been talking through. So doing a community needs assessment, the community outreach for CAB recruitment, then community building and education, and then getting into the decision-making phase. This obviously all occurs before any project is built. And so in a traditional community solar project, none of this would have happened before. As you can see, it takes a lot of time, and every community will be different, but it's really important to have that time to build the trust and the knowledge base that's needed. And while we were in the decision-making phase, we came across another group doing something very similar in Dorchester. They wanted to do a community ownership project as well, and so we decided to join forces. Our missions were very aligned, and it's hard work, so it was great to have another group to join forces with. And so for more on that, I will pass it over to my colleagues at the Boston Community Solar Cooperative.
Well, I think it's time for me to appear on camera. I'm Kate Royce, and I am a longtime resident of Boston, Massachusetts, specifically the neighborhood of Jamaica Plain, and delighted to be part of this webinar today. We're very excited to present what we're doing. So the Boston Community Solar Cooperative is a brand new organization. Although it took us a couple years to get off the ground, we are fully incorporated as of December of last year. And our mission, if you will, is we believe in a future powered by the sun and owned by the community. Our community solar program helps communities to build cooperatively owned solar arrays that are controlled by local communities, where the financial benefits and clean electricity are kept close to home. That's extremely important to us. We are not driven by the profit motives of so many other solar developers. Next slide, please. So one of the tasks that we've had is try to find a good site upon which we could put a solar array. And several years ago, there was an initiative to create a food cooperative in Dorchester, Massachusetts. And the people who came together to form that food cooperative, and I was part of that with several thousand other people, had a smaller committee to work on, could we put a solar array on top of the building? That chugged along. And then meanwhile, people who are very interested in what Diana was talking about, bringing community solar to the neighborhoods of Boston, we've basically came together. The community advisory board that was Energy Allies work, and the Dorchester Food Co-op, and some others, we all joined forces, and we became one and created the Boston Community Solar Cooperative to then put in place this solar array on the top of this building in Dorchester, Mass. Next slide, please. So all of us are coming together, and it's not a large site, but it'll be our first site, and this is going to be exciting. It will be owned by us, the Community Solar Cooperative. We will lease rooftop space from the building owner, and the building owner happens to be a community development corporation called Viet Aid. And then we will provide the electricity from that solar array will go directly to the Dorchester Food Co-op, giving them a major discount on their electricity. So we feel like that'll have a wonderful ripple effect through the community. And details of this, if you want to Google it, it's 195 Bowden Street in Dorchester, and we're aiming to install an 85.3 kilowatt power photovoltaic system. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Greg, to tell you more about how the cooperative was formed. Thank you.
Hello, thanks, Kate, and good afternoon, everybody. So as Kate mentioned, we have been meeting, in an effort to develop what I refer to as a community solar 2.0 solution, where the new solar generation we need to decarbonize buildings, transportation, and power are owned by community members and not by the traditional private developers. This was all made possible by the IRA, which I'll talk about in a few more slides. But we've been working at this for about 18 months. The IRA, by the way, was passed just about 2 years ago on August 16th, 2022. And over that period of time, we were working through what our bylaws should look like, and a lot of minutiae and detail about the kinds of members that we would have and what kind of benefits we'd be able to offer community people, and what would be the onboarding process. So we've gotten to a lot of detail. And so we officially launched, we officially incorporated in December of last year, where we actually had a launch event that was a keynote speaker was Senator Markey, who is the architect of the Green New Deal, who's a senator here in Massachusetts. We had a big community showing, about 75 people that attended our launch event, and that kind of got us, sort of officially out there as a solar developer that's unique in the sense that it's owned by the community. Next slide. So I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. It actually was really a game changer. The act, which is again going to have its anniversary this coming Friday, it actually created a unique set of financial incentives, primarily in the form of tax credits. And so under the IRA, the law passed, for one, it's a 10-year effective period, which was unheard of in renewable energy. So we have a long period of stability for knowing what the tax credits will be. There are bonus credits that are available for projects that are sited in low-income communities, that use domestic content, that are on affordable housing. And prior to the IRA, developers who brought in tax equity financing would have to have the tax equity investor as an owner for 5 or more years. The IRA eliminated that practice. So we now are in a unique market space where we're able to sell our tax credits in the open market as a form of financing. We can get up to 50 to 60% of our projects financing through that particular form of finance, which means we're not incurring any interest payments or debt. It's literally equity, but it's equity that is being exchanged for funds. It's not equity in the project itself. It's equity in the financial arrangement. And that's a game changer, and something that we believe is the enabler of other communities to be able to do similar projects, leveraging the both base and bonus tax credits. Again, could be up to 60% of a project, as a way to reduce the amount of capital that you need to raise from traditional sources like banks or financial CDCs or what have you. Next slide. The state of solar ownership in Massachusetts, is not maybe a surprise to most, but we have about 4.5 gigawatts of solar deployed in Massachusetts over the last 15 years, and less than 2% are providing clean, renewable energy to low-income communities. And so we're hopeful that we think in Massachusetts in particular, we have a unique set of very positive development circumstances that we're hoping to use to accelerate our movement of community ownership. And one is the state has received 156 million in EPA funding from the Solar for All program that's targeting low-income communities. There have been a number of reforms proposed around permitting and siting, so that to encourage solar development in urban built environments. And we have a statewide solar incentive program that pays developers additional incentives per kilowatt hour, depending on where you site your project, et cetera. And those are all tools that we are using as a way to make solar development less expensive, solar projects more profitable, because those profits are what drives income, passive income to our members. So one of the things that we're really focused on is not just the clean energy benefit of clean energy at a discount. We're really talking about passive income, checks being generated to cooperative members that can be used for food, for housing, for energy, and for education. Next slide. So this is kind of a hypothetical solar project stack. Solar is very capital intensive. We don't have a single BIPOC-owned solar developer in Massachusetts, for instance. Almost all of the solar deployed in Massachusetts is owned privately, either through privately held companies or public or multinational companies. And so in this hypothetical stack, we're looking at the ability for us to get the 30% bonus tax credit. On top of that, be able to earn additional 20% tax credit because our project is located on an affordable housing complex in a low-income community, and that kind of reduces our debt financing. And by reducing our debt financing, our projects cash flow earlier and obviously produce more income. And of course, we're also using some grant money initially to get us off the ground, and we're grateful for that. But this capital stack is now, imagine owning a business where every day the sun shines, you're generating revenue. And if you can somehow figure out how to reduce the amount of capital, how that capital costs you, how lucrative a business that can be. And so that's our goal. We want to be able to own a lot of solar arrays in Boston and be able to generate a lot of income for low-income families in our community. Next slide. And I think one of the other major things that we're really focused on is making certain, as a community-owned solar developer, that we are investing in the communities we're operating in. That means we're contracting with an MBE firm, minority-owned firm, for our construction. We have a Black-owned engineering company that's doing our engineering services and interconnection. We've been hiring local talent, community organizers to help us with our workshops and our launch events. And we're giving preferences to local businesses for the events we're hosting, where we're either having things catered or need to print things. We're really trying to be very intentional about making certain that the economic, the money that we are spending, our supply chain, is really supporting the communities that we're developing in. And we think that's a really important element of this ownership model. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Sam, who's going to be taking you through our governance and membership.
Hi everyone, my name is Sam, and I joined as a worker earlier this year and have been supporting our um, our membership needs here ever since. And so just to go through an overview of our governance and membership model, we have three classes of membership that have been authorized by our bylaws. One being our subscribers that essentially sign on to power purchase agreements or subscription agreements to purchase electricity from the solar generation produced by the solar arrays that we develop. Our second being workers who are paid to support our organizational and project development needs, and subsequently earn an ownership stake as a worker owner through that support. And then our third class being one that we are trying to figure the ins and outs of the logistics of right now, but being the investor class, which would provide financial, which would allow perhaps external stakeholders to provide financial support through an authorized mechanism that also maintains our commitment to community benefits and ownership, and also comply with SEC laws and policies and guidelines. So that negotiation between those two interests are what we're trying to figure out and hopefully implement. And in addition to this, our board members serve as directors that work to advocate for these various membership classes. Next slide, please. And then this being an overview of how that model comes into play. So the subscribers pay for the energy, which comes to us as revenue. And then we, as the co-op, cover our expenses between debt payments and then worker payments as well. And then the board of directors in alignment with the broader worker member class as well, allocates a certain percentage to our reserves and then also to our workers as patronage for as their shares. Next slide, please. I believe this is Beth.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Beth Griffith, and I'm a founding member of the Boston Community Solar Cooperative. And one of my favorite things to do in this organization is to actually go out in the community, meet with different people like Boston Open Streets, Climate Tech, and the Solidarity Economy event. Those are just a few of the events that we've been at, and to interact with people in the community, let them know what we're doing, the types of people that we're looking for, and the types of sites that we're looking for. And one of our biggest focus is to diversify our membership, and also, we really do hope in the future to have a portfolio of projects. I see there are 152 people on this webinar, and that's where you all come in. Because like I said, community is in our name, and we would be nothing without you all. And so we would love your help. We would appreciate your help. We need your help. If you're interested, if you know of a site that's available, we would love for you to go to our website, bostoncommunitysolar.org, and you can also put that information. And we're also looking to secure grants and other sources of financing for us to be able to expand and continue our work. And so that brings us to the end of our community solar session. So I will just go to the next slide, please.
Thanks, everyone. So we have one more segment of our presentation that everyone that you just heard from will get a chance to speak again. We wanted to share what our lessons learned, what have been our real challenges and successes throughout this, and what we would do differently or recommend to others that are trying to do this. This was a pilot project, so we knew not everything would go perfect. But if it was easy, then everyone would be doing it, right? So we're up to the challenge. Next slide, please. One of the biggest challenges for us was of course time. Just that this took longer than we expected when we originally designed it and talked about it. We had 12 community members in the beginning of our CAB process. That went down to 6 at one point. It went back up again to 10 once we joined forces with another group. But everyone who's been working on this has a day job or other commitments like families and their lives. And so it's a lot to commit to, and it's a lot to commit to over now 3 years. So, it's been great to have different people come in and out at different times. But it's also been a challenge to keep that engagement and that momentum going. And then, of course, related to that is just having funding to continue this work. So Energy Allies needed funding to continue paying CAB members when we were in that phase, to pay our staff to facilitate meetings, to do the site acquisition, to do the community outreach. And so that was just something we had to continually fundraise for. And was something that without it, we wouldn't have been able to continue this great work. And then next slide, please. The other big challenge was siting. So we initially set out to create a large community solar project on a rooftop in Boston, in the communities we've been talking about. And I mentioned all of the sites that we analyzed and reached out to, but there's a lot of things that can be wrong with roofs that aren't perfect for solar. Too much equipment, too old, not the right shading. Sometimes there's not a great interconnection in those areas. Permitting, these are all challenges that other developers face, but I think particularly as we were new to this space, we also had challenges making those connections with property owners ourselves. We didn't have a track record of developing community solar, and so that definitely sometimes puts people off. And we didn't have that experience, so we had to lean a lot on partners to do the deeper analysis work on roofs, which sometimes created a bottleneck in which we had weren't able to respond to property owners immediately. And so siting continues to be a challenge. We still haven't actually found a very large rooftop. We did get close. Energy Allies did sign an LOI, which is a letter of intent, with one property owner who was developing on a new site, and they were putting in a bid with the city, which did not get picked, and so therefore our solar array did not work out with them. But the co-op is still working on creating more siting opportunities and using some of the work we've done in the past to do more outreach again now as this new entity. And I will pass it on to Kate to talk a little bit about that ongoing challenging with the siting work.
Yeah, the normal pattern, actually stay on siting for just 1 minute. The normal pattern in solar is that a property owner comes to a solar developer and says, I would like solar, and then the bidding process happens and you get chosen. We aren't using that model. We're trying to identify buildings that we could go to and say, we'd like to lease your rooftop so that the community can own the solar array. That's a different model, and it is challenging. We welcome anyone on this webinar to join us in this effort, because so much of it does rely on regular conversations with property owners. And we think many of these property owners might be aligned with us in terms of mission, like the community development corporations or the nonprofits that have housing. So we are continuing to do that work. It will be a major focus for next year. Once we get our Dorchester Food Co-op array built, it'll be able to show that we know what we're doing. And so just don't want to underestimate how much work it will take to find new sites, but we're confident that we will be able to do it. So, and I turn it over to the next slide and the next person.
Yeah, so another set of challenges we found are within membership. So one being recruitment, just through anecdotal conversations through with the community. It seems that there's a kind of distrust, a skepticism of new solar energy initiatives, being that from predatory residential solar practices. And so what we are figuring out here is just creating uh, some messaging around, just creating some transparent messaging around our model and governance, and the value that we can provide to the community as a community forward organization. Again, we don't operate within the traditional solar development space, and so really emphasizing that, and making that the center point of our reputation as a community forward organization. And then something that Diana alluded to earlier was sometimes interested members or those that could benefit from uh, the BCSC model don't have the necessary time or uh, don't have the resources essentially. So that could be money, time, or energy to invest. And so we are also trying to figure out options to uh, increase that accessibility, options to provide a need-based support mechanism that would allow those that don't have those resources to be able to uh, continue to engage. And so Greg, in the next slide, will be talking a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah. We some challenges, along the journey we've been on is, one of our goals was to be able to gift investor shares to community members who cannot afford to purchase a share. And we've run into some challenges because of SEC regulations around ownership of shares and accredited investors and tax implications. So we're still trying to work through some of those constraints. What we've discovered is, in order to offer shares to investors, we most likely are going to have to use a crowdfunding platform that's already been authorized by the SEC, and that does potentially result in a loss of control as to who can be a member. So we put our investor program on hold. We also have a challenge around explaining to investors what their return is. As a new developer, we want to sort of phase that in over time. We are organized under the Massachusetts cooperative laws, and we've learned that that's a structure. The co-op structure is very well suited for our workers, as Sam mentioned. We pay our workers, and they can earn a share. But when you start to expand that to like the investor share idea, it does tend to have these side effects and implications. And that's part of the challenge that we've discovered as we've gone down this particular journey. I don't think any of it is a showstopper. We're working with our lawyers to figure out the best way to navigate some of these things. But the most important thing for us is really about wanting to make certain that the ownership shares that are being granted are true stock shares. They can be inherited and passed on, and they're a tangible asset for folks that's going to be a cash generating asset. Next slide. And so around the financing, where I mentioned the whole idea of the tax credit exchange and the bonus credits. But in order to get those credits, you must apply to the U.S. Treasury. It's a new system. It's been a little bit quirky. They are working out the kinks. And so if you're thinking about doing this, I would certainly recommend you look into the registration of your projects and how you can get qualified, because you need that qualification in order to post your tax credit on exchanges. And of course, the question I get often is, well, who are buying these tax credits? Well, it's high net worth individuals and corporations that have a profit that are buying these tax credits. And so one of the other challenges in this world is um, bigger projects are a little bit easier to get tax credit financing than smaller projects, but it's again, it's not a major problem. Um, and then one other thing that we've run into is because we're operating in low income communities, the business owners that we might want to sign a purchase power agreement with may not have perfect credit. And often the bank wants to know who's buying the electricity, what's their credit score in order to approve a loan. And that's another area. And then we in Massachusetts, we have a system in flux. Our solar incentive program is being overhauled, and that has created a little bit of uncertainty in the marketplace. Next slide. To kind of give you a sense of how dynamic this tax credit exchange market is, as of July or June 30th of this year, over the last 18 months, there's been 15 billion, as in B, dollars processed through one tax credit exchange, but only 0.5% of all of those funds went to a low income project. So there's a lot of opportunity. We want to encourage people to develop community-owned solar systems and to leverage these tax credits. The reason that of 0.5% number exists is because developers are not targeting low-income communities, are not leveraging those tax credits, and that's for me a lost opportunity. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Diana.
Thanks, Greg. So obviously we've had a lot of challenges along the way, but we also feel that this has been a successful model for a couple of reasons. One, it's proven to be a replicable model. We have already, as Energy Allies, replicated this model in Buffalo, New York, with our partners at Push Buffalo, and the BCSC actually served as an inspiration early on for that CAB when they were kind of still uncertain that they could actually do this. They were kind of their model there to look at. But at the same time, this CAB in Buffalo hasn't chosen to create a co-op. They've chosen to work with Push Buffalo as a community embedded organization to own the project that they're developing. And so while our model is replicable, it also allows for community needs and flexibility with that particular community. And of course, the establishment of the co-op itself is considered a success in our eyes too. But in addition to that, next slide, we set out to create and support energy champions, and we sort of surveyed people early in the process and sort of a year in to kind of assess have they learned something from this, and you can see from the slides as the sort of average has gone up, and even those that are still not working in this process with us, they learned something, they got something out of being a part of this, and that was important to us too, because when communities are empowered and educated, then they can push for their own needs in terms of energy and where it comes from and how it's being distributed. And next slide. And then the other key, I think, to the success has just been the people we've been working with. We've been lucky enough to have both Beth and Greg, who are original CAB members, here on this call. And they've just been such an inspiration. And I don't think we would be where we are today without people like them as a part of this. And so I'm going to hand it over to Beth to just share her experience in this process. And over to you, Beth.
Thank you so much, Diana. And so I would just have to say that before I knew about Energy Allies and joined as a community advisory board member, I did not have a positive experience in the solar industry. I was with two companies previously that didn't have the client or community's best interest at heart. And so when I was introduced to Energy Allies, at the time Solstice, it was such a great experience for me, especially seeing people that look like me and a lot of community organizations. They were actually looking for input, and members of the community were part of the processes. And that was just so inspiring to me. And it just changed the way I thought about solar energy. And I really can say I like to call us solar with a soul. That's something that I feel that I've come up with. And it just probably, if it wasn't for the organization Energy Allies and the work they were doing, I probably would have gotten out of the renewable energy industry altogether. But now I've been able to grow, to learn more, and also to give back. I also work as an adjunct with Browning the Green Space and help other BIPOC individuals and women either start a business in the renewable energy industry or scale their current businesses in the renewable energy industry. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And another one of, I would say, the pinnacles of our successes, besides our grand opening, was just having the support of Senator Ed Markey. He was nice enough, thanks especially to Greg, to come to our grand opening. And also, one of the conversations we had, and this also thanks to Greg's leadership, was first of its kind clean energy prescription program with Boston Medical Center. We were initially speaking with them about using one of their routes for site development, but we learned they were already going to they're planning on putting a 365 kilowatt solar array on there. But they never considered giving or gifting energy to their patients that actually go to the medical center. So as a result of our conversations with them, they changed their plans and they included in that project a model of providing energy savings to their patients. And it also will help patients with their energy bills and support the most vulnerable patients that actually go to Boston Medical Center. And we also been in talks with Renew Worcester, and they are looking to officially become a cooperative. So we've been in talks with them, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to provide more technical assistance for them as well. And we will have more success stories in the future as well. So I would like to pass it back over to Diana.
Thanks, Beth. And I know CESA team are running out of time, so I'll be very quick. So a couple of recommendations from us is just taking that time to build trust with community members and trust the process and allow them to lead. It definitely resulted in success for us and them. We also recommend that other organizations that are similar to Energy Allies invest in solar training. There's a lot of great free opportunities out there from University of New Hampshire, People's Solar Energy Fund, the Department of Energy Community Accelerator Prize that you could take advantage of that we did eventually do later in our process. And then continue to collect sort of data throughout the time, because it's great to show progress on things, even if you don't have the exact end result that you wanted, which is a completed solar array. You can collect data on a lot of other things that that help show your progress. Next slide, please. And then, of course, siting. This is something we're still working through, but prioritizing those mission-aligned property owners, using GIS and other technical tools to help with the siting. And as Kate mentioned, having a dedicated person to focus on that. And I'll pass it back to Sam now.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick too, and also looking at next steps for the co-op. Obviously, we're continuing to try to reach more community members, really expand our reach there, and also have the benefits aligned with to the community members, and then identifying more sites. Diana touched on this, but taking a more active approach in finding sites that are suitable for our new developments, and then engaging with new partners. So finding more mission aligned organizations that'll help us move our mission forward. Thank you.
Next slide, just to finish. We hope to continue doing more community-led solar projects, and I'm happy to announce that as of last week, we've officially merged with Solar United Neighbors as part of their energy equity and inclusion program, and we'll be able to do not only community-led solar, but also rooftop solar. And thanks to all, next slide, sorry. Really want to thank everybody that had a part in developing this program, community members, advisors, partners, funders, staff. This work would not have been possible without y'all. Thanks.
Great. Well, thanks so much to all the presenters for this great information. We will transition now to the question and answer portion. We've received a lot of questions so far from attendees. If any attendees have any questions, please submit those and we will quickly work our way through them right now. So the first question is for Diana. Do you have any advice or a template on initial surveys to the community?
Yes, we do. I believe in the lessons learned doc, we have an appendix which has some links to surveys, but if it isn't the survey you're looking for, we did a few. I can also share those with anyone, so feel free to get in touch, and I'll put my email in the chat.
Great. And there are a number of questions specific to Boston and Massachusetts, but I'm going to open it up to questions that are more applicable to communities across the country. So let's see here. What should community members who are looking to pursue this model consider when recruiting CAB members or developing a CAB in their community in other parts of the country?
Beth, do you want to handle that one?
So could you just repeat the question really quickly for me, please?
Sure. So what should community members who are looking to pursue this model consider when recruiting CAB members or developing a CAB in their community?
I would say you really should look for people that have an open mind, that are open to learning, and just not afraid of rejection because you're going to get a lot of no's, but those no's make it worth every yes. And just also look for people that, even if you might not agree on everything, I could say from personal experience in a cooperative, we might not agree on everything, but we just have a high level of respect for each other. So those are really important, I would say, qualities to look for in people.
Great, thank you. Questions about regulatory barriers or challenges. Are there state policy efforts in Massachusetts specifically to help expand this model? And what, if any, are there policy barriers you're looking to overcome?
Greg,
Matt, this is Greg.
yeah.
Yeah, so there is actually quite a bit. So first of all, the Solar for All award to Massachusetts, 156 million. There's actually going to be a specific a pool of money dedicated to community-owned solar. So that's one real important piece of policy. The other thing that's going on here is that we have some regulatory reform. There was a governor's commission on energy infrastructure and siting and permitting practices that have been put forward in legislation that's going to streamline some of the challenges that developers have around getting permits. Typically permits are issued at the municipality level, and it's across the board in Massachusetts. So there's going to be a more streamlined process for that. I think lastly, there is plans to file emergency legislation to increase the incentive pool for projects that are in the built urban environment. And I think those are all really favorable things for going forward. There's a strong emphasis here with our administration on really trying to address the fact that we haven't done well in terms of the solar program and low income community adoption. And so there's a very concerted effort to try to repair the past failures by putting forward programs that are specifically targeting low income communities.
Great, thanks. Some questions about tax credits in the IRA. Did BCSC explore the alternative of forming a nonprofit and taking the IRA direct pay tax credits directly instead? Would that have had different implications as far as SEC tax implications by setting up a nonprofit
Yeah,
versus a co-op?
Yeah, that's a great question. So under the elective or direct pay provisions of the IRA, you only can get paid for your tax credit through the Treasury, and only after you've built your project and filed the tax return. So in other words, you can't use the tax credit to finance the actual development. You have to build the site, deploy the site, and then file a tax return. And even if you're and of course, the beauty of the IRA is even if you're a non-tax-paying entity like a nonprofit, you can actually, receive, the elective pay. But it's a long process. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to monetize those tax credits early in the development cycle by using like a public tax credit exchange so that we can reduce the amount of debt we'd have to incur to build a site. So we're using the tax credit monetization through tax credit transfers. And by the way, that market is expected to be $24 billion this year. So there's a huge interest. So we did look at it and felt like for our purposes of wanting to build multiple sites, that being able to get the cash in the door earlier and reduce our debt makes us more profitable, releases more cash to our members, and is a better model than waiting to build it and file your tax return and get it. And by the way, as a cooperative, we're not eligible because we're a for-profit entity. We're not eligible for direct pay, but we are eligible for the tax credit transfers.
Great, thanks so much. Let's close it on this question. So for states that have maybe a less supportive regulatory environment, could this model be pursued in a community in a state like that, or what aspects could be replicated in communities with a less supportive regulatory environment?
I'm happy to answer that one. We've actually been looking into some of those states where you may not necessarily have community solar in the entire state, but you probably do have a rural electric co-op or a municipal utility that may allow some sort of community solar inside their territories, where you can still have the community-led process and have the community be part of the decision-making process and design the community benefit agreements that work for the community as a whole in deploying more community solar, more solar in their backyards. So there are ways, but yeah, we do need to do a lot of work across the country to make sure that community solar is the law of the land in all of our states.
Great. Well, we'll wrap it up on that. Thanks so much to all of our presenters and this great information. To all the attendees, we will be emailing out a recording of the webinar, and it will be housed on the CESA website. So thanks so much for your time, and I'll pass it over to my colleague Zareen to close us out.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Like Matt said, everyone will be emailed a link to the slides and recording. You will also be emailed a list of our upcoming webinars. We've got a lot of interesting ones, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.